Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. As always, I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical. I am sorry for the delay getting on the air. We were actually talking about the topics of potential future shows and got a little too into it. So I'm sorry about that. My co-host today is Yuri Smouter, the host of the 1+1 program. And our guest today is my friend and longtime social media correspondent, Phoenix Calida. How are you doing today, Phoenix?
I am doing well. How are you?
You know, I am full of mirth. The best line.
You can't say that like deadpan as shit. I am full of mirth. Okay, Charlie Brown.
So you see this line right here. This I am full of mirth and perfect deadpan. This is why people won't shut up about Aaron Sorkin, even though his politics are bad. Because this is one of the moments in the West Wing where Martin Sheen is complaining about a senator who has an opinion he doesn't like on a bill, and so it's filibustering the whole thing. This shows you how behind the times the West Wing was. It's a talking filibuster. but so they decide
a polite way of saying windbaggery.
Mm-hmm.
So they're arguing. The president and his chief of staff are arguing about this senator's filibuster, and the president says, "I don't like him. He's a curmudgeon." And John Spencer says to Martin Sheen, "Well, so are we." And Martin Sheen looks right at John Spencer and says, "You are. I happen to be full of mirth."
Okay.
And he says it in the most curmudgeonly voice possible.
I love it, though. I love it.
It is. I mean, these moments of dialogue are why people still talk about Aaron Sorkin and Joss Whedon's product, despite the people themselves being immensely problematic.
I can see it. Lord.
It's like that great moment. I talked about this. Last week was so great for my guest was a Marxist horror podcaster, and we were talking about H.G. Wells and cannibalism in the time machine. So that was fun. But she mentions, what was it? Oh, she also co-hosts a Buffy podcast, and we're talking about various episodes, and I say, well, they did come up with the line, and while I hate the 6th season, they did come up with the line, Randy Giles? Why not just name me Horny Giles and get it over with? You have to understand British English to get the Randy Giles, of course. Why not just call me Horny Giles and get it over with?
But I was just about to say, given like the allegations that have come up about Joss Whedon,
yeah.
That joke hasn't aged very well.
I mean, aged well or not, I mean, the dialogue is stuff that people are still talking about. We were talking on the air about how problematic he was and how we wouldn't want to be his ex-wife and how she's really the one who wrote the movie that started it all, and he just took credit for it and all this other stuff. So
oh, did we just lose Phoenix?
We just lost Phoenix. Hope she's okay. We'll give it a moment.
Bear with us, folks. These things happen.
They do. I know she had a sinus infection, so.
Well, while we are waiting for her to come back on.
She's okay.
Well, while we are waiting for her to come back on, yes, perfect.
There we go. That's
sorry. Good. My dog got very excited and jumped on me, and I dropped my phone, and it closed the tab, and I'm just like, no, just get a dog. It'll be great, they said.
It is, but you have to put up with some other things in return for that greatness, I will admit.
Yeah, he is like 60 pounds of energy. He's basically like a toddler on steroids. It's great. No, I love my dog though.
Well, you know, it's like the thing where you have I had a I had a parasocial relationship with another podcaster, and I felt sorry for her because her cat was beating her up, and then she and then she ended up coming out with horrible political positions on the election, and it's like,
Oh, so the cat was
maybe
right
her
the whole
cat had a
time.
point.
See, cats be knowing.
Well, I know Ozzy. I know Ozzy Osbourne, whose wife has terrible politics.
Oh, Sharon.
Oh.
And is all buddies with that head up his ass pompous douchebag Pearson Morgan. But Ozzy said.
Oh.
Ozzy said the following though about dogs and cats. He said particularly about dogs, having had several dogs, that dogs are like children; they need constant attention. And
yeah.
My sister had a greyhound who was a very needy greyhound, and I think it prepped her up when when she had kids.
Greyhounds are very needy. They're like cats almost in their desire to impose themselves on you when they want attention.
Are they really?
Except they do it excessively, whereas cats give you the kind of like.
Well, no, greyhounds are also like cats, and they're very lazy dogs that are capable of lightning bursts of activity in the same way that a cat is.
So they're like cheetahs, basically?
Yes, a greyhound is the closest thing to a canine cheetah. That's actually a good example.
Okay.
The greyhound was bred by the ancient Egyptians to hunt antelope.
Antelope, really?
So it ran down. So this is the equivalent of some, just different part of the world, different skin tone. But this is the equivalent of some hillbilly training his dog to help him hunt coons.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is a basic universal part of human history that we deny and try to culturalize in some silly white way when we shouldn't. Because training the dogs goes back to the ancient Egyptians. As most of so-called Western civilization was swiped from Babylon and Egypt by the Greeks, and we must never forget this.
And there is so much about the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, which it's so funny because like as a little kid you're taught. Read these Greek mythologies and then their Roman versions, learn about ancient Greece and Rome. It was such a wonderful civilization apart from the patriarchy, the slavery, the mass warmongering that they did.
But all this is true.
They would be like murdered and like stabbed to death. But apart from that, this is exactly what liberal democracies show.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Yeah.
What we would call the slaves of ancient Greece, we would call the working class now. The relationship between property and freedom is pretty much exactly the same. The primary difference is, believe it or not, ancient Greece had more social mobility for slaves than modern society has for the working class. The ancient Greek slave could end up being freed. His son couldn't be a citizen, but his grandchild could be. His children would have the same rights in a city as foreign immigrants would. He could be rich. He could be really rich. There was nothing stopping a slave from owning property or getting rich. Your owner didn't own your stuff just because he owned you. He was entitled to a piece of your stuff because he owned you, but he didn't own your stuff. He couldn't just legally take your stuff from you.
That might have been ancient Greece, but I can tell you, there was nothing great about being a slave under the ancient Romans, who were
there were in both ancient Greece and ancient Rome, there were levels of slavery, just like there are levels of being working class, and it was very different. And I'll give you a great example because this is something that is both culturally degrading and economically uplifting at the same time, and it explains liberal capitalism to a T. So during the Jim Crow era,
Mm-hmm.
The black middle class consisted of the respectable, well-paid servants of rich white people. Duke Ellington was middle class and educated and knew people with wealth because his parents were a butler and a maid in D.C.
I think it was a similar thing with Miles Davis, but I think his father was a doctor or something like that.
So now there's the whole thing where every Jim Crow community had a black Beverly Hills where the doctors and lawyers who were wealthier because of the economic support they got from having a segregated clientele lived.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting reading from a black capitalist, the general manager and acting owner of the Newark Eagles, who were the African American League team in New Jersey at the time, wrote an op-ed condemning the signing of Jackie Robinson by the Brooklyn Dodgers, saying this was a direct attack on black baseball by white capitalists.
Yeah, I appreciate the irony of that because I'm sure his intentions weren't great, but in the long run, who has really benefited from black people playing sports?
In the end, ultimately,
I'm still of the conclusion it sucks to be a slave in any period, and I would not want to be working class in any period because fucking torture never stops.
That's the secret. That's the secret they don't want to tell you. Being working class mostly sucks in a lot of ways in an economic, socio-cultural sense.
Exactly.
Which is not to say that there aren't good things. A whole lot of great counterculture comes out of working class and marginalized cultures, particularly the marginalized working class, which is something that other people can talk about more than I can. I know that the biggest work fighting against people wanting to tell you what you can do and say on the internet is sex workers who are basically trying to protect their right to make money by porn, but their free speech rights affect everybody else's free speech rights so much more than the rights of some asshole Nazi to spew hate. Isn't that right, Phoenix?
Oh, absolutely. And I find like we're at this really very weird and very interesting point culturally, because historically, like, nobody respects sex workers, right? Sex workers has always been marginalized and discriminated against. But right now, like, we're seeing people being like, oh, maybe we should have listened to sex workers, like, as more and more shit is like coming down the pike about bodily autonomy, when it comes to free speech rights, when it comes to freedom of expression, gender expression. It's like, oh, maybe we should have been listening to these hoes. Like, yeah, you probably fucking should have been, so I find that to be like incredibly interesting right now. I think one of the big turning points has been abortion bans and like these, like all these proposed sort of state surveillance techniques of like, like Google and Facebook and Twitter will like give your messages to police if you're talking about going like out of state to get an abortion. The bounties that they're proposing, I know Texas, actually, I need to go back and look it up because I don't know how they voted. There was like a city in Texas that was like literally voting to make it like illegal to use the interstate to go out of the state to get an abortion because it was like, and it's like, how are you going to police that? Do women just have to like show their ID like to leave the state and like do a pregnancy test? Like, what are we doing right now? But a lot of this shit
ultimately
could very much go down that way.
Let's be straight about that. When somebody says we should police X, and then the immediate question is, well, how are we going to know X? The answer is we're trusting cops to decide whether people are doing X or not.
Yep. Dangerous precedent.
The police have a great track record.
The police have a great track record of deciding who's doing X. Yes, they do.
That's for our audience who might think that you two are speaking Korean, a little bit more background information as to this case and so forth, how it relates to I guess what you both feel is the
Uh-oh, did he just freeze?
Yes, he just froze for a moment.
Also, I'm sorry, my dog is playing with the
Very,
squeak
very
toy. Is the noise like overwhelming?
It's okay.
I haven't heard it. Haven't heard it.
I periodically hear it, but it hasn't been bothering me. I wondered what it was at first, but then it's, oh, the dog has a squeaky toy.
Yeah, sorry.
But yes, give a bit of background information for people who are for people who don't follow sex work news and stuff like that. What's all this about?
Well, porn bans are a big part of it, and porn bans sound good to a lot of liberals who think, well, we don't want porn in front of our kids. And then they realize that porn bans to conservatives mean bans on gay people being gay and trans people being trans and straight people being straight if they're single, which no one really talks about very much.
Yep. Yeah, and I think because as it tends to go, especially in American politics, right? Anytime you want to pass some sort of sweeping legislation that denies a ton of people's civil rights, you basically frame it as one of two ways. Either we're fighting terrorism in some way, or we're protecting children.
Speaking of which, because I mentioned Project 25, I'm going to read a little bit of this out loud, and you can tell me what you think of these awful Project 25 people. The internet is broken, and it's urgent that we fix it. We can and must do more to safeguard the health and well-being of our children, our democracy, and our society as a whole. The institutions and ideals we cherish most are being destroyed for use of free apps that steal our personal data and digital identities. I encourage anyone who is interested in reclaiming their personhood from the machines of big tech to engage with Project. Now here's the fun part.
But Elon Musk.
No, that's actually not Elon Musk. That's the tricky part. I fooled you by making you think I was talking about Project 2025. That is actually Frank McCourt, a liberal former construction guy turned investment executive, the former owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers and current owner of a football team in Marseille, France. And a big Wall Street guy now. His outfit is called Project Liberty. And it is the liberal left, well, not left wing, of course. Obviously, I'm an anarchist and a communist. So when I put quotes around that left wing, I'm talking like a Republican, which I shouldn't do. That he is the liberal Elon Musk, if you want to put it that way. He wants to protect our kids from porn and TikTok, just like the right.
Just like the right. And he's not a right-winger, so obviously he has good intentions. You didn't know?
No, I found out about Project Liberty because a liberal historian who was on my show once to have a debate about whether Wikipedia is good or bad. He thinks Wikipedia is bad because it allows people to undermine the official ideas of the Academy, by the way.
That's ridiculous. Okay.
Don't get me started. Don't get me started.
I mean,
okay. He is involved with this Project Liberty outfit and very aggressively touting it as a solution to things like Trumpism and Russian misinformation. But if you listen to it, it's just the right-wing prescription for control of the internet by corporate government.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people don't realize that because they're so stuck on well, I want to protect kids. I want to keep kids safe. And that's where it stops. It's there's a whole flight of stairs about how do we do this? How do we implement this? What are possible concerns? But everyone's stuck on that first step of well, I don't want kids to be hurt. and like that's all they think.
There's a great article on this topic of protecting kids. It was about the cell phone debate, whether kids should have cell phones or not. And it was written by the great tech reporter. I'm so glad she got away from the New York Times and the Washington Post. She's done really good stuff covering important aspects of some of the sex work and porn stuff that other mainstream media people haven't been doing. And she's also been focusing on long COVID when no one has, despite being a tech reporter. Taylor Lorenz wrote a great piece about how, the people who actually want to protect our kids by taking their cell phones away actually want to make them more vulnerable to abusive parents.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's like a big part of it, because everyone is so focused on like the porn aspect. Like they don't really understand, like people don't understand what pornographic means in like the mind of a right winger, because everyone's like, oh, so you mean like two people fucking on camera? Like, yeah, that's pornographic. But these people also think that like taking pictures in a bikini is pornographic. These people think that women in yoga pants are pornographic. These people think that gay people holding hands is pornographic. Like these people think that a trans woman doing a makeup tutorial is pornographic. Like everything is fucking porn to these people.
I have a friend.
Do they also think that like kids should be banned from like going to Florence, Italy to see the David?
Now, I will say that I have a friend on Snapchat who can make yoga pants pornographic. So, I mean, there is a certain point there if the aesthetic is done right. However, the point is the word pornographic has a very specific meaning. And neither liberals nor conservatives really have a clear image either of what pornography really is or what each other think it is.
Right. And I wish I could remember who said it, but it was a conservative, and he was an anti-porn person. And basically he said like, well, I don't have to explain what pornography is. You'll know it when you see it. And it's like,
yes, this is the free speech case. And one of the guys said, no, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. That was the quote.
You gotta admit, that's some pretty clever shit, right?
I mean,
intellectual as that is, it's pretty spot on.
So, from the right point of view, that could be the topic of a very good intellectual discussion. Now, that said, that's not how the judge meant it. Ironically, that judge ended up voting with the free speech side of things in the end, despite being anti-porn, because he felt that the free speech side of things mattered more than the definition of porn. People would be offended when they saw it if it really was offensive. And if people weren't offended, if most people weren't offended, the minority who were should shut up. Or at least exercise their right to complain without detracting from anyone else's rights.
I think that's also a big thing, right? Because like I'm very big on this idea that almost every conservative accusation is just some sort of like weird confession, And I find that it's like that a lot with anything in terms of sexuality or pornography or anything that's like offensive or distasteful. And it's like, no one's making you look at this.
People
you don't have to subscribe to OnlyFans. And if it's in your algorithm, it's in your algorithm for a reason. The fuck were you clicking on?
I mean, that's the thing too. I mean, Madison Cawthorn was basically thrown out of the Republican caucus of Congress for tattletaling out of school about the sex and drug parties.
Yes.
In which much of the sex was apparently gay.
I'm totally not surprised.
I don't want to say this. I want to say this carefully, because on the one hand, when you talk about how Republicans are closeted gay men, you can drift into homophobia. But at the same time, actual homophobia has been one of the weapons that closeted gay men use to stay in the closet and use to protect the power of closeted gay men from uncloseted gay men.
Yes.
Well, Roy Cohn did that a lot with sexual
blackmail.
J. Edgar Hoover did that a lot with sexual blackmail. Funnily enough, the mob, when they got photos of J. Edgar Hoover as a cross-dresser, used that as a sexual blackmail against him.
But here's the joke.
Of course, all of that can only thrive if
Here's
the society itself is very heteronormative and very
Exactly.
But here's
Exactly.
the joke. Here's the joke. At this time that people were quote unquote blackmailing J. Edgar Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover was living openly with his former FBI partner, Clyde Tolson. They were sharing the home.
They were just good friends. Never lovers.
So you talk about blackmailing J. Edgar Hoover, and it's like, okay, who was it a secret from?
I think it's that's a very much like a respectability politic thing, right?
Yes,
because you can always you always have the plausible deniability, like, oh, we're just friends, oh, we're just roommates, oh, we're just two bachelors who happen to live together type thing.
We've worked together for so long that it's easier for us to live together than it is for us to be married to women.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's a huge part of the homophobia that like really doesn't get addressed. Is that a lot of it just relies on plausible deniability and respectability politics. Like, yeah, you can be gay if you're not like gay. You're not like pride gay. You're not like out gay. You're just like quiet gay.
Now you see it with the heteronormative Pete Buttigieg and Buttigieg straight white dudes bashing kink at pride.
Yeah. Oh God, that was a beautiful. I have to show the fucking screenshot. It was someone did an interview with like older gay men, and the headline was, "We asked people if kink belongs at Pride. They asked if we were cops." I was like, this is the way.
My favorite anecdote. I mean, I have to. It's depressing because sometimes I really wish that I weren't for the most part straight and that I were more queer, because I would be able to enjoy some of this even more than I do. But in the 1990s, early 2000s, when liberal media was making gay marriage the gay rights issue of the day, the actual hoary old leaders, joke intended, maybe not, of the gay rights movement in California were saying, fuck gay marriage. Why are we not talking about housing discrimination against unmarried couples? That matters a whole lot more to gay men. And it was hilarious because the people who were talking about housing discrimination against unmarried couples were were immigrant rights activists, Black groups, sex workers, and gay men.
Yep.
And that coalition was just destroyed by the middle classifying of the gay marriage campaign.
People think I'm being harsh, but I really truly mean this from the bottom of my heart. I think if we didn't have sort of like a liberal slant on gayness and that sort of like yes girl type of like performance, we would not actually have gay marriage in this country. Like, I'm very convinced that a lot of people were like, I just want to go to a gay wedding because it's going to be fabulous. And like, that is like the first and last thought they actually had about rights for the LGBTQ community.
You know,
was like, I just want to go to like a nice wedding.
It is so easy to engage people on because it didn't actually threaten anyone but annoying religious people no one likes anyway, even the other religious people.
Right.
And lots of liberal leaning people who were not good on abortion. I'm thinking some of the friends of Barack Obama and the Clintons when I say this, but lots of liberal leaning evangelicals who were not so good on abortion were able to really pinkwash their liberal credentials by embracing gay marriage while still not really being great on abortion.
Yep.
That being said, I think it is an important civil rights, gay same-sex marriages.
Marriage.
But at the same time, there is a problem with too much focus on just that one element of discrimination and not enough elements on workplace discrimination, workplace bullying, school bullying, and also the biggest taboo, which is sex education. If you're queer, it fucking sucks, sex education in schools. But if you try to champion that, the socially regressive assholes go, "You're teaching the queer agenda on us. You guys are being woke mobsters." And then
it's called. So let's stop calling it sex education. Then maybe this is the problem. Let's stop calling it sex education and call the class instead child abuse awareness.
They won't let you do that.
Yeah, no.
They're not gonna let you do
This
that.
even sounds sexy.
Yeah.
But you see, that's the problem. Is we're letting people who gleefully embrace their worst sexual impulses tell us that sex is bad, because sex is bad for them because they're predators.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying. I'm just like, it doesn't matter how we reframe it or what we call it. They'll never let us have these conversations because they don't want their victims to be aware.
Exactly.
And like ultimately at the end of the day, that's what it like always comes down to. And so like, yeah, getting back to like the whole like sex work and porn ban stuff is like, yeah, that is a very frustrating element of it, is because like I do want to protect children. I want children to be safe. I want children to thrive. I want children to be healthy. But you know, you have to be able to explain certain things to them. You know, one of the things about, because again, people are so stuck on like the porn, like, well, I just don't want to see people fucking. Like, okay, fine, then use your fucking filters. Jesus Christ, that's what they exist for, you know. But at the end of the day, it's not just that. It's also stuff about reproductive health. It's about what does a regular period look like? Can I Google that? What are signs of a miscarriage? Can I Google that? How can I engage in safer sex practices? Can I Google that? And like the answer is no. They don't want you to be able to Google that. They don't want you to know. They don't want you to talk about informed consent. They don't want you to talk about you know, how to negotiate sexual boundaries. And all that stuff is being framed as some like weirdo, like leftist. It's just crazy, these people and their ideas. And honestly, it reminds me a lot of the election. I know I'm going to get like kind of roasted for this. I don't care. Is that like, I do have my criticisms of Kamala Harris for like a lot of reasons, but one of the things that is like just killing me right now is watching these like autopsies on the election and people being like, well, she catered to the woke mob. And I'm like, fucking where?
That's the whole thing though. That's the whole thing though.
Actually, let me jump in this because
Please.
Because it really gets under my skin. First of all, she did not fucking cater to the woke mob, and this is where we need to start confronting the racism that does exist amongst the mostly large white cisgender left. What the fuck do you guys mean about woke?
And
she did not cater to them. She spent 6 months bragging about how Dick Cheney, war criminal at large, and his douchebag daughter likes her.
and let's tie this in. Let's tie this into the woke mob issue. Let's not forget that Liz Cheney is the formerly pro-queer Republican who threw her gay sister's rights under the bus to be a congresswoman from Wyoming in the first place.
Woke mob.
But also, and let's face it. I'm not. Let's not get into the whole history of where the term woke came from, but it was a very innocent word. Hillary Clinton uses it once in one of her stupid windbaggery
Hillary Clinton,
where she says we need to be more woke. The moment she said that, the Jimmy Dores of the world, the Max Blumenthals of the world, the Chris Hedges of the world, and then all of the people who are so class reductionist or focus only on anti-imperialism, then started to use the term as something. The right wing started to use it as you know, the woke mob, which is basically we don't want to see black people in our period films set in England. We don't want to see queer people in our Star Wars and Star Trek films.
So two terms that we should stop using. First, we should stop using child porn. Because child porn is not porn.
It is not porn. Porn implies consent. What you're actually watching is child rape, child sexual abuse. It's not pornography. It's a fucking rape video.
The second term that we should not use is what's the word I'm looking for? The second term that we should not use is class reductionist, because I'm a class reductionist. I think about class all the time, and nothing, and almost to the exclusion of anything else. But my class reductionism tells me things about patriarchy and racism and white supremacy that I would not notice if I were looking for those things just on an identitarian basis, because I can see how class warfare is used to hurt marginalized people who are, because their marginalization is itself a class marker in our society. Racialization was done to keep a class of people in their social place and divide them from other workers in the North American context.
Okay, so I'm going to disagree with you, actually.
That's fair.
Yeah, I also
because, like, I understand what you're saying, but now you've kind of like put yourself in a corner. Like, you now have the same problem that like Christians have, right? Because y'all Christians who be like, no, Jesus said go feed the homeless, so I'm going to go feed the homeless. But then you also have like Greg Abbott, who's trying to, like, last I heard, like, defund a children's hospital because they aren't asking for your immigration status.
Yeah, well,
like it's kind of like you run into this like big tent problem, you know.
And I get what you're.
And also there are some and by the way, many of the devout do this. There's lots of great stuff that Jesus says and stuff like that, and I do not disagree with those great stuff.
Sure.
Blessed are the meek, blessed are the merciful.
Blessed are the meek. Blessed are the meek.
There's a lot of stuff in the Bible that also
blessed are the meek is a Roman imperial edict. That is not what that phrase originally meant. The Roman emperors believed that meekness was a virtue in subjects. That does not mean that that's what Jesus said.
Agreed. Sounds great. So, anyways, but look, the problem is, but let's get back to the porn issue very quickly. I'll just make this point. The problem with the whole, and I've said this many times, a lot of times when people complain about identity politics / wokeness, it just is dog whistle for.
Well, they are. That's why I hate the term class reductionist, because they're not actually class reductionist. They just hate people who aren't white.
I actually would argue that they are class reductionists, because the only thing they're aware of is their like status in class and where they are in the social hierarchy and on that ladder. Because that's the thing, like, that
but they're
frustrates me about them is because, like, even if we were to, like, right now we do a whole restart, we have some the revolution happens, it takes 2 hours, we're suddenly in some like new utopia communist era, what the fuck ever. It's still going to be the same racism. It's still going to be the same patriarchy. It's still going to be the same misogyny. It's still going to be the same homophobia, because these people never unpacked any of that shit. Because all they cared about was class.
You can't undo any of that history anyway. I mean, that's happened. So that's now part of the historical materialism that the Marxists are always talking about, but sometimes ignoring.
Right. No, and like, I get that. I'm just saying, like, because they're so focused on class, like, they haven't developed They haven't developed their roots in other places.
They don't even, but I would argue they don't even have a clear view of class and status. They have an Americanized view of class and status, where the United States, for many years in its culture, was a middle class country where the average person was more likely to be a homeowner than anywhere else in the world. And the reason for that was genocide.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's important to understand that this genocide of indigenous people was itself based on a lie. And they had to come up with excuses to keep justifying it. The lie was, we are going to the heathen and bringing them the gift of Christianity and salvation. But they reached the point where all the slaves were Christians now, and their souls had been saved for a few generations, and they didn't have an excuse anymore.
And also, P.S. very important to know: indigenous people still exist, so let's not erase them.
No, and the genocide is still ongoing, and that erasure of their continued existence is part of it.
Make like a little just a side personal grievance. I have indigenous ancestry, and I made a thread about the Taino people in Puerto Rico. That's where my father's from. Yes. But like how they had like a very deep understanding of like hurricanes and like natural phenomenon. And I actually, like, my shit got taken down for nudity because I showed an image of, like, the goddess of hurricanes. Anyways, I was trying to educate the folks, and Twitter said, go fuck yourself.
Actually, but that's a perfect segue. That's a perfect segue to get back to the issue of pornography and so forth.
Yes.
Because...
Right.
But before we re-explain the current war on pornography, which is just a war on, anyone that's not what the Christian conservatives want us to be.
Right.
During the 1980s, when there were all these big legal battles about banning Playboy, Hustler, and Penthouse, and night shops, 7-Elevens, and so forth. What did the Supreme Court actually say about pornography, and what was their ruling about how it can be distributed and consumed? Because I know what's his face.
So the law.
In a lot of those high Supreme Court battles, right?
You have to understand the law on the books is the Comstock Act. The Comstock Act is a regressive law written by a censor. Literally, that's what he was a censor for some private organization and ended up as a postmaster and got really into censoring mail. And the Comstock Act was written by was named after him. He wrote it, but it was sponsored by other people in government. But basically, it's illegal to send, quote, obscene material, unquote, by mail.
Right. And I would just add for people who this is about porn or this is about OnlyFans. I don't care. This is also the same Comstock. I can't even fucking say it. Comstock Act is how they're trying to argue that you shouldn't be allowed to send birth control via mail. So in case you still don't think this is about you,
and this is about you. This is actually one of the things that the Supreme Court case where this is Griswold v. Connecticut. This is a civil rights case that doesn't get talked about very much, both because of it gives people rights that the government doesn't want you to know you have, but at the same time, it also doesn't overrule the Comstock Act. It's the compromise decision from that judge's, well, I know porn when I see it argument. But what it comes down to is a married couple has the right to receive birth control through the mail because they're married and they have the right to make to their own legitimate family planning decisions as a married couple. This thin reed that a married couple has the right to family planning is why birth control isn't illegal in the U.S. That's the only thing it relies upon.
Yep.
And the Comstock Act can still be enforced if someone chooses to make that decision go away somehow.
Can I also just point out the inherent sort of patriarchal entitlement of that whole argument, right? Because it's not about maybe a woman doesn't want to be pregnant. maybe pregnancy is a life-altering thing or might potentially kill her. No. It's about the fact that, like, I'm married, I own this, I get to fuck it when I want to.
That's pretty much what it
like,
comes
and
down
I'm sorry to
to.
be like so like gross about it, but that really is ultimately what the argument is, because it's not about reproductive health. It's not about women's rights. It's not about I just don't want to be pregnant. It's not about we can't, as a couple, we can't afford another child. It's none of those things. It's really just making sure that married men are entitled to fuck. And like, I kind of hate that about it.
The old arguments for against porn, I always find quite fascinating, because first of all, I think it's also very important to say this, but Playboy magazine, for all of the big campaigns that fake CIA agent feminist Gloria Steinem did against Playboy hardly showed that much sexual activity. Showed a lot of,
and they took the nudes out except for the centerfold.
So I'm just gonna say, I think a big part of that is just straight up misogyny, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
There's a lot of animosity towards sex workers, because most sex workers are women, be that cis, trans, or even like AFAB individuals who are like non-binary. But the vast majority of sex workers are women. The second largest segment of sex workers are gay men. And people are really sort of incensed at the idea that we have found ways to survive and make money outside of traditional venues where we have typically been excluded. Like, people get really mad about the idea that you can, go do sex work and make $200 an hour, as opposed to being forced to work for like minimum wage at fucking Walmart.
And I would argue that you see this in most pro-exit campaigns, where no one ever actually talks about that what a sex worker really needs to exit is a guaranteed job that pays the same income she can make as a sex worker.
And I would add, not just the same income, but the same sort of schedule flexibility. Because a lot of people will be like, $200 an hour, that's like a wild amount of money. And like, it is, but you might only be working, 1 or 2 days a week. You know what I'm saying? Because you have a disability or you're a caregiver for.
I work with electricians, so I'm in a building industry. I do tech support for electricians over the phone, installing lighting controls in new construction. Right. Electricians charge massive amounts of money by the hour, but they only get paid when they work.
Right. Exactly.
And they have freedom to control their schedule, because they're an electrician, they're a skilled tradesperson. Their schedule is done by their scheduling is done by appointment. I mean, and the reason that an electrician has that power is because an electrician has a trade union.
Yep.
What we see in the anti-porn movement, the anti-sex work movement, the so-called anti-trafficking movement, more than anything else, is the ability, and I'm going to use blunt language because I'm trying to make a point, and I apologize, but this is the point of view that these folks are using. They do not want to see a P word, Prostitute, have the same trade protections as an electrician.
Yes. Absolutely. And what I find fascinating is so many people will be like, well, it's, you're just laying on your back like it's nothing. You can just do that. And it's like, then you go do that then. If it's so easy and you make so much money, why aren't you doing it?
So, and I'm going to say this as a straight man. Porn is selling a fantasy. Nobody can actually do that in real life. That's why the dude on the camera gets paid for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, okay. Well, actually, I actually sort of lost my train of thought. So, but let me.
Sorry.
But let me return to this. I think this is one of those things where, people were. I mean, I wouldn't really call it the culture wars, because if you think about it, we have conceded a lot to the anti-porn movement by you have to be a certain age to get the magazines. The magazines most of the times don't even depict raw sex acts. It's a whole lot of nudity and stuff like that. That was the point I was trying to make about Playboy and why I find it very weird people protest against Playboy when there actually was a lot of soft stuff and just the occasional nudity and stuff like that.
It's worth noting, because this is actually a misconception that's easy to understand at the time, because people don't remember the Playboy Club anymore. It's gone now. Gloria Steinem was not leading a crusade against the magazine. Gloria Steinem did an undercover expose of what it was like to work as a cocktail waitress in the Playboy Club. The Playboy Club was an exclusive, if you were a non-member, you could get in with a fee, but it was mostly for members.
Mm-hmm.
Very exclusive lifestyle enterprise that was selling an experience for mostly single men of affluence.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a lot of unofficial sex work going on.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that Gloria Steinem was investigating was whether or not bunnies were being coerced into sex work and trafficked.
Okay.
Now, she ended up writing an expose about sexual harassment because no one was actually being trafficked in the way she was trying to prove.
Exactly.
Well, also, I find that hilarious that she's leading a crusade against a magazine, which I'm pretty sure there was abuses that took. I'm pretty sure there was abuse that took place.
Again,
I'm pretty sure. Wait. Let me finish. I'm pretty sure that there were some people who misbehaved. Hence, why there sometimes would ban people from the Playboy Mansion and whatnot.
It's worth noting.
But Gloria Steinem was a fucking CIA agent.
Yes.
Yep.
That engages in human trafficking, sexual blackmail, and whatnot.
Yes. I feel like I stress it a lot, but I feel like it also can't be overstressed enough, is that, again, the root of a lot of this is misogyny and women being paid for labor they're not typically considered being worth paid for. Right? Because sex work is not seen as a real job, so you're not supposed to pay women for it. If women do engage in this, you're supposed to slut shame them, you're supposed to ostracize them, you're supposed to harm them because they're not doing their job. A lot of it goes back to sort of the concept of the nuclear family, and I know that's a newer concept, but traditional marriage is no, that's for your husband and that's who that belongs to. You're not allowed to have sex with multiple people. You're not allowed to make a living off of having sex with multiple people. And a lot of it really does come down to that sort of misogyny. And I think a lot of it too is there's a deep hatred of women who are not victims in a sense. Right? Because under traditional patriarchy, the only way to be successful as a woman is to be married to a man who can provide for you. But what happens if you become a widow? What happens if your husband is abusive? You know what I'm saying? What happens if you become disabled? Those sort of things. And sex work has kind of granted allowances around those, and people are really pissy about the fact that there's a whole other market where women can survive, and they just don't like it.
The great intellectual failure of Marxism is the fact that Friedrich Engels wrote the book, literally, on the family under capitalism. And Marx essentially convinced him, tone this down, dude, you're going to offend the normies. And the original founders of the first American Socialist Party, the first quote unquote American Marxists, were thrown out of the party and the International by Marx himself for centering Engels' work as central to the importance of continuing what Marx at the time called the bourgeois democratic revolution, which was that you needed to give women the same social and economic rights as men. Their platform was referred to as free love. Victoria Claflin Woodhull, the first Marxist candidate for president and the first woman to run for president, famously broke the Beecher-Tilton scandal, not because she was trying to break a sex scandal as a horrible embarrassment for the participants, but to praise Catherine Tilton for seeking out the affection and companionship she needed when she could not get it within her marriage. And it turned and the most hilarious fact of this is her authorized biography was written by Catherine Tilton's husband, who spent the entire period writing it, living with Victoria Claflin Woodhull. So it's just, people were willing to embrace something that now the most radical people sound like bourgeois Puritans on issues, because they reject the idea that women can be people too.
But at the same time, I think the socially liberal movements regarding particularly the porn industry, because prostitution.
I think it's a mistake to conflate porn with liberalism, for the simple reason that liberalism has been bashing porn and queer people while pretending to sort of defend their rights for years.
Yeah, but that's why I emphasize using the word social liberalism.
Fair.
Yeah, because I think in many ways folks have conceded a lot of the supposed concerns of the anti-porn folks by, you have to be of certain age, 18 or something, to buy the magazine, to go to a sex shop to buy the porn tapes. You got to pay a lot of money to get whatever porn you want on your television or even your laptops. You have to be of certain age, mostly 18, to access porn websites and stuff like that. And then pornography television still only comes on after midnight, or beginning of midnight, and you still mostly have to pay for it, especially when you're traveling in the hotels. So I don't get what more do these people want. And I understand that there are some people who are disturbed by some of the content in porn in which kind of like rape fantasies are being taped. There are sometimes very extreme sexual acts that's being displayed, which people say is not healthy. Like, for example, I read that in softcore pornography, but even extreme pornography, anal is often depicted when most people actually don't even do that. That kind of goes back to what Chris was saying. Porn is a fantasy. Now, if a lot of young people who, regardless of how much protection, how much censorship you put on the internet, if a lot of young people are getting their pornography on their iPhones and the internet, okay, that is an issue to be had. But at the same time, okay, if you want to have a conversation with kids about what a healthy sexual relationship is, then you have to have those uncomfortable conversations, or at the very best, sex education.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think a big part of that is the fact that people really don't consider sex work to be work. I think that's like a big part of the problem, because like the stuff that you described, right? Yeah, and I say this because I know a lot of people who do porn and post their videos, and like they're seeing like just wild amounts of censorship, like, oh, you can't depict this act, or you can't do that fantasy, or you can't do this image, or you can't show this. And so like they're getting really limited on what platforms they are. But again, in my opinion, that's because people don't view sex workers as workers. Because if this was about movies, Like, you can go see blood in like, I can name fucking 10 movies where somebody gets raped or killed or like whatever. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I can find all type of violent shit in movies. I can find a movie where someone gets like beat to death.
The worst exploitation shit.
Right. But like you can't do like a kidnapping fantasy in porn. Like that's there's
Well, Phoenix, I'm glad that you segued into this question because I think the reason why, even though I don't like to see sexuality often thrown in my face, like, I personally think there's way too much sexualization that does go on in our culture. Like, once upon a time, it was just like Madonna and Cher. Now it's every other pop star. Talented pop EDM vocalists, may I add, who I think don't need to do it, like
can I just say
XX and so forth. And I think there's way more of that's being thrown.
Can I just say
face than this boogie monster of porn. And even but that being said, I find it incredible that we glorify militarism and we get a fucking avalanche of so much violence.
I want to say that Madonna and Cher deserve credit for breaking barriers, but I find it's actually very unfair not to give Dolly Parton the immense credit she deserves for really allowing women to sexualize themselves and profit from sexualizing themselves, as opposed to someone else profiting off sexualizing them.
I want to be trash.
Yeah, it's really expensive to look this cheap.
Yes.
Phoenix, I'm curious your response on that, on the whole, while everybody keeps complaining about pornography, we see a lot of over-sexualization, especially in hip-hop and pop EDM music.
Yeah. So I think that's
people call out hip-hop, it's just racism. I want to stop there. People call out hip-hop because of racism. This is why no one ever calls out Dolly Parton for being for being so sexual in her performances, the way they call out black artists. Nobody blames Dolly Parton the way they blame Madonna because of that, like a prayer.
Okay, so I think there's like two things happening. One, just to Chris, to address what you said, I understand what you're saying about it being like a racialized thing, and it absolutely is. But I also think because there aren't as many like venues and genres for black artists to get into, it's like very apparent when black artists are being hypersexualized because it's only going to be in like rap and hip hop. It's not going to be like a ton of pop stars and a ton of country stars, and you know what I'm saying? So like that makes it a little bit more glaring. But to the other thing, I think it's a larger conversation about how actually sexually regressive our society is that pornography is sort of seen as this boogeyman, but by making, there's like this sort of like, what is it, like the paradox of intolerance, right? It's kind of like that with porn. Like the more anti-porn your society becomes, the more sexualized it becomes, because now everything is a fetish, everything is taboo, everything, you know what I'm saying? And like, so like we've sort of started creating a culture where like everything is sex except for sex, because we can't talk about sex, we can't talk about porn, but everything else is sexual as hell.
That was the
and now we're like in a weird spot.
Victorian era. Oscar Wilde. Everything is about sex except sex. Sex is about power.
But then I wonder, how does the society advance how does a society advance where people can just chill the fuck out? For example, I do have a problem with the over sexualization and the pop vocalists, even if it's 100% their freedom, them feeling the need to constantly be titillating and nudity and stuff like that. But at the same time, I really don't want the socially regressive conservatives to have their way, because we know exactly what happens when they have their way. So how do we get to a point where...
Honestly, a lot of it to me goes back to like workers' rights or like leftist organizing type of stuff, because, and maybe I'm showing my age here, but I'm in my 40s. I remember early hip hop shit. Not everything, like female artists weren't necessarily that sexual. They weren't necessarily that sexualized. Like there were some who were, but you had more range. And that's when everybody had their own like independent deals. Everybody ran with their own independent crews. It wasn't like everybody was under like one of like 5 record labels or whatever that exists. And so you had more freedom to like be an artist and be yourself. Like, this is my style. It might be sexual. It might not be sexual, but this is who I am. This is my art. And I feel like we don't really have those opportunities anymore. And I really do think that speaks to sort of like capitalism and corporatization of America. That there just aren't a lot of opportunities. There aren't a lot of options anymore for people to be independent.
Queen Latifah would have a very hard time breaking into the music business today as a new talent if she wasn't willing to be more like Lizzo.
Yeah, she would.
Actually, in fact, that's what I find quite sad about the state of female hip hop, because I think pop music, because pop music, particularly R&B, which is basically like black pop vocal music. There is like you still will have like a diversity of like different singers and so forth. Some will be titillating, some will just be normal and so forth. Whereas in female hip hop, we've not graduated from Lil Kim, and I think
exactly.
It's very sad. I think it's very sad that we don't have, as you mentioned, which is also a problem with rap, is that we don't have enough diversity. But especially with female hip hop, all you have is a version of Trina, a version of Lil Kim, and a version of Megan Thee Stallion, who I think is like takes it to a whole nother level. And that's where I go, okay, now.
Yeah. No.
Can y'all
I totally get it, because I do have like my 90s nostalgia, because like, yeah, if I wanted to like watch some like ratchet shit, I had artists that could give that to me. I also had artists I could go to when I wanted to hear some woke shit. I also had artists I could go to when I just wanted to hear like a club banger. There were artists I could go to when I, wanted to hear some like hardcore, like gangster rap, or you know what I'm saying? Like I had options, like, but they were all like mainstream options, where now it's like, I don't actually know. Are people still doing horrorcore? Is that like still a thing? Is it just Eminem? I don't even know. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, who is the mainstream? Like, what? And I think like that's a big thing. But again, back then people used to have their own labels. They came up on their own thing. And I would also like, I get a lot of shit for this, but I'm just gonna say it. Will you please stop chasing the cat? Yeah, obviously I'm yelling at the dog. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But a big thing for me is that like the culture we're in, where everyone's trying to get out of being working class, everyone's trying to get out of having to like clock in to do shift work, and virality is a thing that can get you out of that. And so I find a lot of artists, in my opinion, are not trying to create art. They're not trying to create like lasting, memorable pieces. They're trying to go viral. And like there's a difference between trying to put out art and trying to go viral and get this money. And like, I think that also impacts the art as well, honestly.
And well, of course it does. I mean, the willingness of YouTube artists to do anything to get money, even no matter how much it sacrifices their artistic integrity, is how we ended up with the monstrosity that was Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson.
Oh God!
A YouTube comedian versus a nearly 60-year-old man.
Wait, isn't Mike Tyson the YouTube comedian?
If you want to say a YouTube comedian grudge match, that's good too. But Mike Tyson's YouTube comedy is built off his success in a different career, whereas whatever success Jake Paul's had in boxing or mixed martial arts is built off his career as a YouTube comedian. So it's very different.
The only thing I know about his YouTube career is that he once went to an island where like people commit suicide and like looked for bodies. That's the only thing I know about his YouTube.
So he and his brother Logan are like classic fortunate mediocre white people in the right place at the right time. Which is to say,
that's the story of America.
I mean, it kind of is, especially when it comes to the entertainment industry. Even some people who are decidedly not mediocre. We are only aware of the fact that they are not mediocre because they were rich enough to fail a lot first. What my favorite example, because he's not someone who's never always thought of as a silver spoon rich kid, is Humphrey Bogart, who was able to play great working class roles because of all his time failing in Broadway on his rich family's money.
And that is
well, that's fun.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, he genuinely he cared enough about his working class roles that he was one of the first people to join the Communist Party, and you get that great live film of him being mean to the congressional committee during the blacklist era. Now, of course, behind closed doors, he named names, and it's not nearly as cool anymore. But you have that great video of Humphrey Bogart telling off the House Un-American Activities Committee about their Hollywood bullshit. And that was only possible because, he had embraced these working class principles from his acting and from his failing and from having to be dependent on other people's money. And he was like, I should care more about people who don't have my advantages. But not everybody has that experience, and most people don't, it seems, these days.
No, they don't. Not at all.
It's actually, but if porn was to be banned tomorrow, wouldn't that just be like a huge catastrophe, just like when alcohol was banned? Like, wouldn't that just give like a huge boom to organized crime and human trafficking and whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. But then again, you also have to understand that a lot of this is coming from an end demand perspective. And specifically what end demand means is ending demand for pornography, for sexual services, for sex workers. And so the goal is to get as many people out of sex work as possible. And so they don't necessarily take into account what that looks like in practice. And so it's like, if there's 10,000 sex workers and you want to get them out, if 10 of them die, you have 10 less sex workers, you won. You know what I'm saying? If 10 of them, and I think like that's a big part of the thing that no one really discusses is that sex workers are seen as acceptable collateral damage in end demand models because a lot of these models.
But is stripping considered sex work, by the way?
Generally, yes, it's under the umbrella of sex work because it is a sexual service and also because a lot of strippers do extras, whether they talk about it or not. So it is under the umbrella.
Secrets that like some do dodgy shit on the side then. As long as it's consensual, I guess.
Yeah, it's consensual, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, because that's the thing is not every club will let you do those type of services. So like you have to be sly about it if you do. So, but yeah. That's
but okay. So that's interesting. Perfect segue, Chris. If I can ask the $1 million question about prostitution, I'll take that as a yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Phoenix, I'm very agnostic when it comes to legalizing or completely decriminalizing prostitution. I have heard very good arguments from both sides of the debates, but as somebody who is agnostic but tends to lean more towards I do not want to see prostitution legal, please pitch to me why even if you are against a person's choice to prostitute themselves, why I should be more in favor of legalizing it.
All right. Well, for one, I'm not going to defend legalization to you because I think it's a shit ass model. I support full decrim though, and I can tell you a lot about that. And essentially the big thing is that I approach it from a harm reduction perspective, and I want people to be as safe as possible, no matter how they're choosing to make their money. And I just simply don't find a compelling reason that selling sexual services or hand jobs or blowjobs or strip shows should be a criminal thing. I just don't find a reason for that. And then when I add into account on top of that, how many people come from marginalized identities who do sex work, right? We're talking about like women, we're talking about migrants, we're talking about non-white people, we're talking about gay and queer people, because they aren't necessarily offered the same type of employment security in vanilla or straight fields. So like a lot of them have to rely on sex work. And so I think it's like extra shitty to further marginalize these folks because they're just trying to find a way to get ahead in a society that doesn't support them, because we don't have the social networks, we don't have the welfare systems. So for me, yeah, I approach it from a harm reduction, and decriminalization is the best form of harm reduction, because I just don't think that you deserve to be strangled to death because you suck a dick for money. Like, that's kind of my whole thing.
But funny enough, my countering though on legalization as opposed to decriminalization, in Holland, weed is decriminalized, not legalized. It's decriminalized, meaning, and the problem with that is the government, if we do have a right-wing douchebag government or insincere liberals who get to power, they can easily shut down the coffee shops. So wouldn't it be better if prostitution is legalized, as long and you can have an aggressive background check to make sure that the person who wants the prostitution license doesn't have like an organized crime background.
So this is the difference between full and partial decrim, honestly, because you're giving a great example. Holland does not have true decriminalization. Holland has a partial decriminalization scheme where people are able to be decriminalized if they operate through a licensing system that puts them at greater criminal risk if the right law enforcement oriented government ever takes power. Portugal, who we're not talking about, has full drug decriminalization. What does this mean? Well, what this means is that if a cop finds you ODing in the street, you're not committing a crime he can arrest you for. You're a person in distress who, under the laws of Portugal, he has a responsibility to get help for. That's a big difference. In the U.S., if I'm a cop and I find you ODing on the street, you're committing a crime that I have to arrest you for. That's my first responsibility.
And I would just point out that there have been cases where people have like OD'd and then get to the hospital, and their drug tests at the hospital are then used as evidence against them for drug conviction. So I mean, like, yes to all of that. And I would just point out that like one of the biggest problems with legalization is, for one, not everyone can afford to be legal for whatever reasons. Like they just simply cannot comply with whatever like the legal laws are. So like for sex work specifically, we've seen stuff.
The requirement to be licensed and bonded is the best way to explain it. Licensing and bonding is the biggest barrier to people starting their own businesses in many countries, because licensing and bonding requires money.
Yes.
Anything that sets out a legal path to being a licensed such and such means control over the profession. Now, this comes back to the electrician again. I use the electrician as an example because everybody understands trade unions. The electrician has a trade union that defines what an electrician is, and only that trade union can say someone is or isn't an electrician.
Right.
Which is very different from a situation we have now where a cop decides whether or not you're a sex worker.
Yes.
So in Phoenix, rather than, actually, explain to me what would be, in your idea, a very good model of sex work which is not marginalized, which is not harassed by corrupt police officers, which is not in control of organized crime, and where those who voluntarily choose to pursue that line of profession, what would be a great model for that in terms of, and yeah, I'm going to use the term legal, decriminalized, but yeah, what would be a great model?
I think New Zealand is doing a fantastic job. New Zealand decriminalized sex work a few years ago. My one beef with it is that it doesn't apply to migrant sex workers, and I feel like that's like a very big misstep. But in general, like, yeah, I think the New Zealand model is great because now we do have sex workers who are making their own unions. We have sex workers who are now able to legally sue for things like actually, someone recently got convicted for stealthing, right? He took the condom off during sex without permission, without consent. He's going to prison for that. We had a sex worker who sued her brothel because her manager was sexually harassing her. She won and she got like a hefty chunk of change. And I support that. I think that's really sorry.
There was
The dog is chasing his tail and it looks hilarious. I'm sorry.
There was a union case in Belgium that I wish I knew more about, actually, and I wish Yuri knew more about it because I would ask him. But
in Belgium, we're going to see how
it comes about what's going on in Belgium specifically. The language barriers don't help.
We're going to see what's going on in Belgium. They recently just passed a decriminalization model, but like it's sort of still a little bit too early to tell how it's going. But based on the demands of their unions and the activists, it sounds like it's going to be a great model because one of the big things is that it entitles sex workers to be able to access social services. So things like maternity leave and, like rental assistance if needed, like those type of things. So like fully supporting it.
I know that there was a great labor capital dispute when it came to the actual provisions of the bill itself. And this is where this is the part I know about, and I don't know as much about the bill, but the union was hailing the bill that was passed as their victory against the sex capitalists.
Yes. Yeah, because a big part of it is that obviously people don't want to see sex work as real work, but they also want to put, again, a lot of this is coming from the end demand mentality. So they want to put as many restrictions on sex workers possible to make it difficult to be a sex worker, to keep the amount of sex workers low. And so a lot of that type of stuff, like there were arguments about how often a sex worker could say yes or no to a client. Those sort of things, like how much control does a brothel manager have? Should sex workers be allowed to work on their own? Right. This is like one of the, and very contentious in Europe specifically, are like brothel keeping laws, because there's obviously, like, when you think of a brothel, you think of like a building and someone owns it and someone manages it and there's a bunch of women in there. But also what we've seen is that under end demand models, we'll have something like, for example, like 2 or 3 women who share an apartment together and they all do sex work, and that can be considered a brothel, and they'll go to jail for brothel keeping, despite the fact that's not like a licensed brothel per se. So, a lot of argument about that type of stuff.
And on the other hand, if you have a civilian roommate and you help your civilian roommate pay the rent, your civilian roommate can be prosecuted as running a brothel because she's taking money from you to pay the rent.
Hey, Nordic model, I see you.
That's also this was popular. This was popular in the part of Nevada where it's legal. They were using these loopholes to prosecute people who were working outside the brothel system.
Yes, exactly, and that's really one of the biggest issues with legalization is it hands power to a certain amount of people over sex workers, and I just don't trust those folks. I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's unsafe.
When if you really want to talk about what's safe or not safe, you note how that anything in any labor dispute that empowers the boss over the worker empowers labor trafficking.
Yes. Absolutely.
The best examples that I can think of are that the U.S. meatpacking and agricultural industries account for much, much more human trafficking than the so-called sex trade.
Yes, absolutely. And no, you're absolutely right. And but again, sex work isn't really considered to be real work by most people. So sex workers are left out of these conversations. But yeah, there's way more trafficking in agriculture and domestic labor than there is in sex trafficking.
But Phoenix, now I do understand people who just object to prostitution because they find it is a low form of whatever. Like, why on earth would somebody degrade themselves like that and allow Okay, like I can sort of get like I can get inside the mind of a person like that. But what I don't understand is if you have prostitution, which is legal and it's safe, and you make sure that the workers are constantly being checked for STDs, and the workers themselves have a union and stuff like that where they can have collective bargaining, and you do have some kind of an oversight to make sure
So
that
I want to ask a question because this is something that jumps into my head a lot when I think about this. Why are we talking about testing, about singling out sex workers for STD testing as opposed to singling out, say, married wealthy white men for STD testing?
because it's their job to have multiple sex partners, ergo
Well, but
make sure that they're being checked up.
the married wealthy white man is more likely to give his wife a sexually transmitted disease she doesn't know he has.
Right.
Because of him like cheating or what?
Yes. Of course. Because I mean, this is the thing. When we're talking about singling people, we're talking about singling people who have sex for a living out for STD tests. This is like, now, obviously you need worker safety standards, and workers need to have these conversations. But remember that there is a difference between worker-driven worker safety and liability-driven worker safety.
Right.
And a lot of worker safety stuff in the capitalist arena is liability-driven, not worker-driven. Especially when it comes to legal compliance.
Yeah, so I could just say, like, in my own observation and based off what I've read, based off what I've seen, you're far more likely to contract an STD hooking up with a random person at a bar than you are engaging services of a sex worker. But yes.
Actually, but explain that, like how so? I'm very curious as to why that is.
Well, a lot of things. One, as you pointed out, sex workers' job is to engage in sexual services. So generally speaking, sex workers tend to be a bit more informed about safer sex practices, more prone to actually do STD testing, that sort of thing. Because, like, I know it sounds like ironic, but
more curious potentially about their customers' history.
Yeah. And a lot of people, like, I mean, the state of sexual education in this country is an absolute mess. And a lot of people just don't get tested. Like, if you ask the average person, like, when's the last time you got tested, like any sort of STD testing, it's abysmal.
My friend is a privileged white woman, and I'm not saying that her situation is normal. But I have a friend, if she has a new client form, she showed it to me out of journalistic interest at one point. I'm not going to name names, but she gave me permission. She has new clients say, have you tested positive for anything in the last 6 months, 1 year, 18 months? If so, what? And you don't like it? We don't do business.
Yep.
Now, obviously, not everybody can do that, but she does. Right. That's the economic niche she falls into.
This is also where a single payer of healthcare would be a fucking heaven sent.
Yes.
But then,
this is one of the reasons conservatives oppose affordable childcare, by the way.
But Chris, but let me bring you into this question now. Now, Phoenix, do you know about Holland's prostitution laws and the Nordic model?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what's good or bad about the Dutch model? And I know Chris saw I wouldn't call it a debate. I would call it was a civil discussion about prostitution, yay or nay, that I had on 1+1. And Chris expressed that he actually is against the Nordic model. So I'm curious your assessment of Holland's approach to prostitution and the Nordic model, yay or nay.
So Holland's approach, because it is a legalization model, I'm opposed to it. It ultimately creates certain barriers, again, like that not everyone can work legally, right? You have to be in a red light district to be considered legal. You have to work in certain places at certain times in certain buildings. And if for whatever reason you just can't accommodate that, you're still criminalized, which means you're at risk. This is especially like a big risk for people who are facing things like homelessness, or people who are migrants who don't necessarily have like an in-network sort of social safety system, those sort of things. So,
and
like,
these would be people who would voluntarily want to be in sex work, even if it is
yeah.
a desperate thing and it might degrade
Yes.
them, but hey, it pays the rent, as opposed to the trafficked person in which they have to do the sex work at gunpoint, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah. And so like we've seen a lot of stories with like that sort of situation where someone can't work legally, and then ultimately they're actually at higher risk of then becoming trafficked because they can't work legally. So it's like you get what work you can where you can, and traffickers will pick up on that, predators will pick up on that and be like, you know, you have to give me like a certain cut so I don't turn you over to police, or you have to work for me, or you have to like, you know, go with the clients that I'm picking for you, like those sort of things. And so that tends to be a big problem that we've seen with Holland. And then in general, the Nordic model, I am very opposed to it because it's only a partial decriminalization model, but it pretends it's a decrim model, but it's not. And a very big part of where it goes wrong is like it starts with two premises. One is that sex work is inherently harmful, right? And so like I find that to be a flawed premise to start with. And secondly, the idea is that anyone who's engaging in sex work is a victim. And I don't find that to be helpful. That leads to just really bad allocation of resources, honestly. And so then,
and a very regressive paternalistic approach to
yes,
said person.
Yes, especially like going back to earlier, like how this is like tied to like things like abortion rights, because it's really, do women deserve bodily autonomy is where a lot of this is coming from, whether it be sex work, abortion rights, birth control access, all that stuff. But the premise of the Nordic model is that sex workers should not be criminalized, but their clients should be. And so that puts sex workers in this really awkward position. And a lot of people who support the Nordic model don't really think about like the everyday sort of like practical implementation of it. And so they'll be like, well, you're not getting arrested, you're fine. And it's like, no, you're not getting arrested. But if you rent an apartment, your landlord is legally obligated to evict you. So you're not, so because he's not living off the, so he can't get accused of living off the proceeds of prostitution. Right.
And actually, now, of course, that's very flawed in and of itself. That you, well, actually, I like the idea of prostitutes not being criminalized and not going to jail if some undercover douchebag cop does arrest them. But I don't know. For me, I have very mixed feelings about the idea that if you're some sexually frustrated person / loser who does.
Okay, like... so here it is right now, and because because you have a certain viewpoint of sex workers, you also have a certain viewpoint of who goes to see sex workers.
Yes.
Now, people are surprised all the time when I say I'm not a client, but I'm not. That said, the people who are a lot more quote unquote normie than me.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm someone who happens to have friends who are sex workers because I am active in the kink community, interested in queer rights and learning about actual class-related issues as they pertain to queer humanity, various race and labor issues, questions about actual abuse versus the choices that people make. The fact that workers are considered disposable in such a large across such a large frame of industries that when we single out sex work as saying, well, sex work as an industry where women are particularly disposable, then we're saying sex workers are disposable from our point of view.
Right.
And there are traps here. And there's all sorts of, and I learned this from not being a normie, there are all sorts of traps lying in wait for the person who makes assumptions about the normal lived experience about other people that turn us reactionary fast. Disability rights is one of the best examples I can think of, where people become very, very intolerant of disabled people asking to have their rights respected.
Mm-hmm.
Sex work is another situation where people become very intolerant of sex workers speaking up for themselves on these issues. I was kind of laughing to myself when you were asking Phoenix what she thought of the Nordic model, because my opinions on the Nordic model have come from people like Phoenix.
Yeah.
But this goes back to the problem in but this goes back to the problem in which you have some people who work in pornography who say it's all hunky-dory, leave us alone. Yes, there's a few Harvey Weinsteins, but we can fix this shit ourselves and just give us some more powers for workers' protections. And then you have some people who are ex-porno actresses and whatnot who just want the industry to be eradicated. So you have some prostitutes who are in favor of a good legalized or whatever model, but a model where there is no criminalization.
No.
And then others who are survivors of either human trafficking, sex trafficking, whatever you want to call it, who say, no, don't legalize prostitution because you're legalizing, because you're normalizing the unthinkable that women are disposable and whatnot.
This is considered like a rude thing to say, but I feel like it's a very important nuance to throw in, is like, if you've only ever been trafficked, I want to hear your opinions about trafficking, not about a legalization or a decriminalization model per se. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because if someone was, for example, like trafficked across borders and forced to be like a fruit picker, would you let that person like determine all your opinions about the entire agricultural industry? Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. I think that it is very important to listen to these people. I think it is important to listen to their viewpoints. But at the same time, even people who are like, I want the sex industry eradicated, still acknowledge that one of the best ways to get people out of the industry is to provide social support systems. Like, give people job training, give people free housing, give people medical care, give people, the option to use free daycare if they have kids. Like, ultimately, like, even the people I disagree with generally still, like, we're still sort of on that baseline, because the reason people do sex work is because they need money. And that's our society. So, like, let's make it easier for people to live, and people who don't want to do sex work will be out of sex work.
And then the question becomes, when you look at some of these anti-traffic organizations that talk about supporting exits from the industry, it sometimes feels like every successful exit story is someone who's gotten a job with an exit-oriented nonprofit.
Yes, it is very much kind of a grift in a lot of ways.
I wasn't going to call it that. I was just going to say that it seems very curious that people, yeah.
What I would say is curious is how a lot of anti-trafficking orgs love to talk about non-white women specifically, and especially in the global South, being trafficked, but they're very rarely the face of anything that's anti-trafficking. Even former people in the industry tend to be conventionally attractive cisgender white women.
And,
I'm sure that's completely coincidental.
And those who are not are very proud of their ability to pass.
Yeah, so it's
Well,
one of the reasons I am so aggressively aggressively anti-trafficking people as I failed to, it's my fault. I did not do my due diligence, but I was tricked into platforming somebody by a very good speech they gave on somebody else's show in support of trans rights. But then they ended up being a horrible anti.
Oof. Yeah, I will say, oh, go ahead. I was gonna say a lot of anti-trafficking movements tend to be rooted in white supremacist Christian patriarchy.
Yes.
And so, yeah, like they're.
You said it, Christian patriarchy, and this goes back to our good friend Chris Hedges. Now, Chris Hedges, let me tell you something very interesting. Chris Hedges, I think he, in a way, kind of converted me into the idea of being anti-prostitution. Because before, I used to just have a very simple, socially liberal, libertarian view of legalize it, it'll get rid of the criminals, blah, 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 and so forth. And then I started to, and then I think getting into the Epstein human trafficking scandal and listening to people Chris Hedges would platform who were against prostitution is why I now have the agnostic point of view I have.
Okay.
Now, that being said, one of the people that Chris Hedges always platforms to cite why he's against prostitution is a former prostitute from Ireland, and I was watching a presentation.
Oh, God.
I was watching a presentation.
Is it fucking Rachel Moran?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
and
I know her.
And I was listening to a panel discussion she was having with her fellow feminists about why prostitution needs to be legal and so forth. But they said something which made me have to like pause and rewind it. They started to basically like start bashing trans people, trans women, coming up with their stupid tropes about the trans man who's pretending to be a woman who assaults other prisoners. And then that's where I was like, okay, done. No longer interested in your opinion and so forth.
So the actual real life version of that horror story, which played out in California while a recent failed presidential candidate was attorney general, is a trans woman who is put in a men's prison, gets her lawyer to get a judgment from a judge saying her life is in danger in a men's prison. She needs to go into a women's prison as soon as humanly possible. And Kamala Harris makes the decision to fight it in court to keep her in a men's prison as long as possible. And 9 hours later, she has been murdered.
That's horrific. What I will say is that, like, from the sex work conversations, like, we oftentimes use the acronym SWERF, right? Sex worker, exclusionary, radical feminist. They more often than not tend to also be TERFs, who are trans exclusionary radical feminists. So it's, you know, a SWERF and TERF, if you will. It's the combo nobody asked for, yet we can't get away from. But yeah, because a lot of their ideology comes from that sort of like very like upper middle class white radical feminism where mostly white women are always like victims who have to be absolved of everything because we have women in general have like no agency. And so like that's why they're obsessed with things like the Nordic model, be like, it's bad for all women are victims in sex work sort of thing. That's where that comes from. And yeah, they also do tend to be TERFs. And I just want to throw out a side note on Rachel Moran, like a bunch of sex workers who worked where she said she worked said they don't know her. And that's all I'm going to say. Like, they said they don't know her. Like she was like she was not on that. She was not on that corner. She was not on that blog. They ain't never heard of this bitch. Okay. Anyways,
it reminds me of the dude that Oprah platformed who said when he was finally exposed, no, I wasn't really a child soldier, but I swear that every story in the book was true because I got it from a real child soldier.
Oh, yeah. Well, Norman Finkelstein, who's not my favorite Jewish anti-Zionist voice anymore, but in his book, The Holocaust Industry, the Holocaust Industry, he talks a lot about how, like, Oprah multiple times, by the way. Oprah, multiple times, by the way, has had people who claim they were these Holocaust survivors or these like harrowing war survivors, and then they all were just liars that later got debunked.
Well, I mean, the simplest thing to remember about Oprah is that she is responsible for Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz.
Yes.
And Obama too. We cannot forgive her on Obama.
But I find, and maybe it's my identity, maybe it's my clinging to certain identitarian issues myself. I find Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz more offensive than Barack Obama. Which is not to say that I cannot criticize Obama on a wide range of issues. I can.
And you can.
But I
definitely can.
I have substantive criticisms of Obama, whereas Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz's existence offends me.
No, I'm there with you. I'm there with you.
Well, Dr. Oz is is our modern day snake oil salesman, and Dr. Phil, his show is for people who think that the Jerry Springer show is beneath them.
Well, Dr. Phil is honestly about making people who perhaps should be pathologized a little more and given more actual mental health assistance, quote unquote, taking ownership of their shit.
Yeah.
And the demand that people own their shit, while on the one hand seemingly reasonable and a basic requirement for adulthood, ends up becoming a tremendous lever of oppression in lots of ways.
Well, the other problem with a show like Dr. Phil, or the even more extreme version, which was Jeremy Kyle, who's now this far-right douchebag junk journalist in Britain, is, first of all, you've just met the person, assuming they're not all charlatans and all the stories aren't fake, art's fake. But if you've just met the person who clearly has a lot of emotional baggage, clearly comes from a dysfunctional family because this person said that, another person says that, then they clearly need to be in some sort of family therapy, some sort of therapy. But the problem is, and this is not just America, most countries have this problem, mental health care is not considered health. And mental health care needs to be merged in a single payer system or a public option type system. And
yes.
Story. And
well,
I agree. As long as people don't have that, and you have this 2 to 3 tiered system of mental health in which some people are never going to get the help they need because they can't afford it. Other people get it when the money is somewhat good, or other people just go, fuck it, it's just overpriced out my range, leads to people not getting the help they need.
Sweden socialized their mental health system when they socialized the rest of their health system. It's not a perfect system. There are a lot of abuses. If you have at all read the perhaps over famous Girl with the Dragon Tattoo books, part of that. Yeah. Well, part of the underlying argument of that book is an anarchist, anti-authoritarian argument against the paternalism of Sweden's system. But at the same time, so I'm not going to say it's perfect, but at the same time, Sweden has only had like 1 or 2 school shootings in their history. And there's something to be said when when Republicans talk about mental health being connected to school shooting. They're not wrong. It's just that they're complete assholes who don't want to do anything about mental health either.
Exactly.
And they don't want to talk about how mental health affects workplace violence. And too much talk about how school impacts mental health would lead to talking about how work impacts mental health.
Exactly.
Yep. And I think we're also stuck in that sort of like Protestant mindset too, where it's like, if you just pray hard enough, God will heal you type thing. And it's like, that's not how it works at all, actually.
The other thing, Phoenix, the other problem with that whole Protestant mentality is Protestantism is all about personal responsibility, and the Protestant ethic, the most famous pro-capitalist thing by Max Weber, is all about that kind of stuff. The personal responsibility that, like, you know,
the true Protestant movement actually came about to protest the Protestants. The true now this is me. The true radical liberation movement within the Christian community is one that was almost completely ignored, except for the violent moment when they actually took power somewhere, and that's the Anabaptists. The Anabaptists were founded on the ideas of Melchior Hoffman, who was an associate of Martin Luther, and who had watched Luther very closely during his attempt to reform the German church, and had studied Jean Calvin's attempts to reform the Swiss church, and who reached the conclusion, as radicals always do, that some things can't be reformed, and really you have to abolish the church.
Well, that's fun.
Now, Melchior Hoffman had some apocalyptic ideas, as white Europeans often do, but his apocalyptic ideas wouldn't have been any worse for Europe than Karl Marx's apocalyptic ideas, which is to say they might have been better than apocalyptic capitalism, which is what they got instead.
Martin Luther is an overrated,
The Munster Anabaptists took over the city of Munster near the tail end of the Reformation, what became known as the Counter-Reformation. They threw out the Calvinists who controlled the city and the Catholics. And they went to all the middle-class households and they asked the wives, do you want to live with your husband? And if the wife said yes, they went on to the next house and asked the next wife the same question. But when a wife said no, they said, well, who do you want to live with? And the wife would tell them, and they would take her out of her husband's house and take her to the person she said she wanted to live with, and that would be her house.
Okay, that's kind of fucking cool, though.
Isn't it?
Feminism with Protestant characteristics.
This protest against the social morality of Christianity, the economic bondage of the wife, this protest against something Engels was defining years later, but turning away from, was based on economic equality, which meant two things. Number one, you had to throw out the rich people and share their wealth among everyone. And number two, women got to decide where they lived.
Interesting.
That's woke. Sorry.
Now, this idea that women got to decide where they live is the same fundamental principle that was later embraced by the first radical, and I mean this in a good way and not the modern way we use it now, the first radical feminists in the 19th century when they started talking about free love. And some of the most committed Marxists were women who had read Engels in the feminist movement. And Marx threw them all out because he was just too patriarchal to take it.
Yeah, had those social conservative blind spots, and I can tell you, those socially regressive blind spots are going to be the fucking death of us. which is why which is why, and I guess I am very much a socially liberal person when it comes to this. Whether you like pornography or not, you have the choice to look the other way. Whether you like that awful, violent, heavy metal music, there are two knobs on the radio. One of them turns the radio off, and the other one changes the station. And when it comes to prostitution,
just going to talk about radical egalitarianism for a moment. Part of radical egalitarianism, really destroying class distinctions, means that a woman has the right to fuck up her life in every way a man has, if that's what she wants to do. And it is not a man or another woman's place to stop her because they don't approve.
Yeah. I support it.
Exactly.
Now, I'm not saying that I agree with every idea that somebody says really is fucking up someone's life. I'm not a normie. I don't pretend to be a normie. But at the same time, I was a normie once. I stopped being a normie because of egalitarianism. And ultimately, when we're talking about destroying class, we're talking about an egalitarian society where every member of the collective, regardless of their ability to contribute, is of equal value.
That sounds great to me.
Yeah, like I'm here for it.
This is what the Munster Anabaptists were trying to do in the 17th century when they threw the Catholics and the Calvinists out and asked the women who they wanted to live with. But they were not massacred by the pro-Calvinist government because they took over a town. Calvinists had taken over towns all the time. They were massacred by the pro-Calvinist government because they asked the women where they wanted to live.
Right.
And
they were referred to as sinful and immoral, and I'm going to use the language of the time, whoremongers, because they supported women's right to make their own decisions about their lives.
Interesting. Well, I unfortunately I keep getting messages and it's definitely my parents, and they're saying, when can we actually make dinner? So it looks like I have to go.
That's fair. We've been about 2 hours, so this is a good time to wrap. If anybody has any final thoughts or promotions, Yuri.
Check out 1+1 and if you do check out 1+1, do donate generously. And this was a fascinating conversation. Phoenix, would definitely love to have you on 1+1 to talk more about prostitution and why I should get rid of my agnosticism and adopt your point of view. And would love to have you, if it's even possible, a debate with Jenny Lorsoli, who's a Haitian Quebec leftist who, when not campaigning against imperialism, around the world, is an anti-prostitute feminist. So it would be interesting to have that debate if possible.
Yeah, let's see what we can do. I'm on Twitter. I barely check it, but I do check my DMs, and on Blue Sky. So find me. Yes. I don't know. I feel like I'm supposed to have like some like great closing comment, and I don't.
I understand all the time. I finally sort of accidentally came up with a tagline very early on that I've just stuck with ever since. So, but I know what you mean. But do you have any? Are you still doing a podcast these days? I know you.
Yeah, about that. No, I'm gonna get back on my shit though. Like this month, November has just been like ridiculous for me. I'm about to get back on my shit though, and I will be back podcasting.
Make Make sure to send me the link. We'd love to check it out.
Absolutely.
I can't criticize anyone for taking time away. I've done it myself. I'm trying to take care of my stuff now. I've consistently done a show more weeks this year than any previous year. So yay me.
Yeah, man.
Hey, good job.
It's always a struggle to actually engage with an audience these days since the internet broke in 2022. But
and some libertarian douchebags flood more audience to certain folks than others.
Well, so what we're seeing, this is worth its own show. I'm just trying to get the people I want to have on it interested, and I'm going to have to keep trying because they don't check their DMs as often as we do, sadly. But there really is another show out there about how social media has been deliberately fragmented in a way that directly and indirectly targets us being both people who create independent content and us being people who are politically outside of the normal strain and not in the pro-Nazi way because billionaires love the Nazis.
Exactly.
Right.
When you look at the people who do manage to get some sort of uplift from billionaires while being on the left, it's people like Greenwald and Taibbi who minimize Nazis in a way that helps the corporate Nazi lovers.
Without fail.
One of the things that I can agree on with a lot of...
Or you have Chris Hedges, who in a speech, he goes, why am I against fascists? Because they are fascists and we should punch them. But we need to overthrow the capitalist system non-violently, and we can't be too mean to and we can't be mean to the people who storm the barricades because they have free speech, right?
Cops are workers too.
One of the things that really made me change my thinking about Chris Hedges. And it's funny because I'm a white guy and I changed my opinion about a white guy because of his argument with a white academic. So this is sort of telling on myself, but whatever. During the early days of Occupy, Chris Hedges was extremely critical of Black Bloc and Antifa and violently protecting people from police violence. And David Graeber, the late David Graeber, who, I hate to sound like a parasocial Taylor Swift fan, but the fact that David Graeber cared enough to answer my DMs and engage with my tweets was really important to me.
Wait. David Graeber, was he the American anarchist that was based
American anarchist who taught at Oxford? His widow, Nika Dubrovsky, runs the David Graeber Institute, does lots of good stuff in British media. Sadly, not enough in mainstream British media, but, British independent media.
No, British corporate media sucks. Even on the
corporate
good days,
media sucks.
Exactly.
The reason we're here on Sunday morning is because the only other choice people have are 3 Sunday morning network news shows that are all the same.
Meet the Press. Warning, lower than a plank of...
Meet the Press and Face the Nation. No real press or nation involved.
Oh my God! I haven't seen those shows in like 2 decades, man. Like I can't even remember. Well, it's because I don't like.
And I can't even.
Myself, so.
I can't even remember. I can't even remember the third one and whether it's ABC or CBS. I know Meet the Press is NBC, but it's sad I can't remember whether Face the Nation was CBS.
I think it's ABC
or ABC. And I can't remember what the other one even was.
something with Wolf Blitzer or Jay Cracker or Anderson.
No. Fun fact about Wolf Blitzer. His first job was for APAC, and his second job was an anchor for CNN. He's not worked anywhere else.
Oh, I love it when the backstory explains so much.
Jake Tapper. Now here's your conspiracy.
Jake Tapper is interesting because one of his first jobs was for like Salon.com. And no. He became a columnist because of his real job, which was a PR guy. So whenever he was doing columns in Salon, he was doing paid placement for PR clients. That was John McCain his favorite client because he really liked John McCain.
And so Jake Tapper worked for the biggest PR firm in DC. They were founded by a Republican and a Democrat when they left Congress. It was the classic PR firm of the 90s and the Clinton era for both sides. They represented both sides, the people defending Clinton and the people trying to prosecute Clinton.
Yeah, he's from Canada. He's one of those awful like Canadian exports.
No, Tapper's from Philly.
So
Tapper's from Philly, like Bibi Netanyahu.
Sometimes I wish I could just be a liberal. Like, I would have no problems and have so much money.
You know, what if I just could have been Cenk Uygur or Jimmy Dore before they were?
Oh my God! Yes.
Actually, Chris. I don't know if I want to risk this, but maybe we should let's just try it. Be anti-vaxxers.
No. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
Wokeism.
I lost friends because I couldn't do it. I lost friends because I couldn't do the anti-vaxxer thing. It's sad.
Okay. What if we start like a raw milk company?
We can do that. I can do that.
We can do that.
Raw milk company, sure.
Oh yeah.
Get RFK Jr. to endorse our brand.
No, not RFK Jr. That's like I have like my ethics, and like my ethics will just not.
So Jenna McCarthy then. Jenna McCarthy, not.
Oh God.
Which is funny. Mm-hmm. She's actually come out and said COVID convinced her to not be anti-vax anymore.
Really?
Wait, who did?
Yes.
Jenny
McCarthy said COVID convinced her not to be anti-vax anymore.
Well, damn.
Dude, there is hope for humanity.
That's the one good thing. I don't know what will. That's like the one good thing that came out of all this. Bill Maher got worse, but Jenny McCarthy got better.
I mean, Bill Maher was always going to get worse. That was just an inevitable trajectory.
That's true.
Such an asshole.
Bill, once pot was legal in more states than it was illegal, Bill Maher had lost his biggest anti-establishment credibility.
That is true. But even then, when he could have supported somebody like a Dennis Kucinich or a Mike Gravel, and he still chose Obama because he's that much of a fucking douchebag.
Yeah.
So,
he's no George Carlin, he's no Bill Hicks, and he's never, ever going to be a Lee Camp. So all I can say is, fuck you, Bill Maher. Like, I hate this guy with I hate this guy with every fiber of my body.
Bill Maher doesn't even have the honest douchebaggery of a Dennis Miller who's willing to ruin his own career because he's just so sure he's right. Bill Maher is only willing to be a douchebag in ways that promote his career.
Very much so. And what's so funny about Bill Maher is, apart from the fact that, he's Mr. Atheist, but he loves the ethnocracy, settler colonial, Jewish supremacist state of Israel, is the fact that, he has, Trump derangement syndrome, but he literally does propose the exact same things that Donald Trump proposes. He once said
you have to understand
should be trained to
You have to
go fight
understand who Bill Maher is. You have to understand who Bill Maher is. Bill Maher is an Irish Catholic for whom the two horror stories of his upbringing are the Spanish Inquisition, where people were accused of being fake Catholics, and a version of the official version of the European Holocaust, where Christians went to camps because they had a Jewish mother. Now, it's worth noting that Bill Maher is one of those annoying people who would probably call themselves cultural Christians, even though his cachet is very much anti-God, anti-church. He's very much a cultural Christian.
Richard Dawkins has come out as a cultural Christian, and Ayan McGon, not Ayan Hersey Ali, that was her fake name, but Ayan Hersey McGon has come out as a born-again Christian.
Yes. So much for the new atheism.
Well, what's hilarious is that she grew up, that fucking awful bitch. She grew up as a Somali refugee in Kenya.
Yes.
She grew up amongst Muslims, went to like Islamic schools, and they all treated her with respect. She was not a victim of a female genital mutilation. She just milked for what it was worth all those bullshit horror stories, just so she could get out of an arranged marriage and live in Holland.
So
she became a flaming libertarian asshole.
It's worth noting that there is a race and class aspect within Islam of being opposed to female genital mutilation that is actually a very thin veneer for anti-Bedouin racism, in much the same way that a lot of things said about Palestinians, their Islam specifically, and Hamas's alleged policy towards queer people, that is seized onto in a way that is used as a racist weapon against people who are more oppressed. And I'm not saying that female genital mutilation is good. It's not. But there is a reason that it was socially acceptable to frame certain things as anti-circumcision that were really anti-Semitic in the 1970s.
Interesting. Yeah, no, interesting. But it's another one of those things where it's a half-truth, right? For example, was Saddam Hussein a brutal dictator? Yes. Did he have WMDs? No. Were Saddam's sons also very unsavory people? Yes. But did they actually like chop people in half with fucking the axe thing? No. And I think that's the same thing when we do talk about very socially regressive places which do exist across West Asia, the Middle East, whatever you want to call it. Some of those issues are true, are valid, do need to be addressed. But at the same time, it's used as an issue to basically get us to support the next unjust imperial war.
I am always interested in other perspectives about American enemies, even when I can find things to dislike about the enemies of America myself.
Yeah.
I have always been more interested in the criticisms of the Iranian government by Tudeh and the Iranian Communist Party than I have been in criticisms of the Iranian government by groups affiliated with CIA.
Like the MEK and whatnot.
I have.
All right, so
Congress.
I have to get on another call in like 5 minutes, so I gotta bounce. But Thank you.
So
This was
let's
lovely.
close out. I was trying to close out, and we started a whole nother conversation. Phoenix, thank you for joining us.
But that's what I love about this show. That's what I love about this show. Like even though my parents are starving and they're wanting dinner, like this is too good to just like gotta go and rush off. So,
but we're done now. We're done now. Thank you both for joining me. I really appreciate it. Everybody who's watched, we appreciate you too. I do hope to be back next week. I still have to book a guest. We'll see what happens. Until then, everybody have a great week, and we'll tweet at you.
All right. See y'all.